Welcome to the Planning and Development Committee meeting for November 2021. The meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank those of you in the room today with us and acknowledge everyone watching Council's social media channels. I acknowledge the Mayor, Portfolio Leader Councillor Carl, Councillors, Acting CEO Mike Brady, the General Manager Stuart Summers, and thank you for being here. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse these lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, Gibel and Jarrawa peoples, and pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the traditions, the rich ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. So item number 2 is the attendance, including apologies, leave of absence and declarations of conflict of interest. We have one apology, Councillor Summerfield. There's no leave of absences and I don't believe there's any declarations. Item number 3 is the development assessment. Motion for the apologies. Sorry, can I have someone move that? Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Melissa Taylor. All those in favour? It's carried. Item number 3 is the Development Assessment Regional Development Statistics Report for September 2021. Thank you, General Manager Summers.
Good morning, councillors and Madam Chair. Basically, look, I'll be fairly brief, just to run through the broad stats. The September versus August figures for the approval of lots. September had the princely sum of 1 new lot approved, versus in August we had 50 lots approved. Seals in September, 41 versus 34 in August. Basically, in terms of approvals for detached houses, September has slipped in comparison to August. The figure is 51 detached houses versus 93 detached houses approved in August, which really recognises that the tail coming off the federal government incentives. In September, we actually had a bit of a boost in the number of units. We had 10 compared to 0 units in August. The regional investment in building across the total region was again down, about half, 27 million versus 46.7 million in August. The development applications are actually up in September. We had total 307 development applications in September compared to August of 254. So that's heading in an upward direction. I just thought I'd mention over the last, since 2017, the last 5 years, we've had an average of 774 houses. But if you take this year out of it, which is somewhat different, and these are calendar years I'm talking about, we have 741 average per year for the last 4 years preceding this year. It's interesting because I think with the federal government boost, it's probably meant that we have an additional, estimating towards the end of this year, it'll be about a bit over 300 additional houses, more than we would get in an average year. And the quarterly update, of course, is due this time round, and the quarterly update is there for councillors to have a look at, which is very much a helicopter view of what's been happening in the last quarter. Are there any questions?
Councillor McDonald.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you very much through you to General Manager Stewart. Appreciate the quarterly page, Stewart, just that snapshot, the overarching one.
Yep.
I would find it very interesting to have with that the same period last year next to it, just to have some sort of an idea, keeping in mind that we've gone through an interesting time. You've just mentioned an extra 300, new houses over and above what we'd normally have, which is extraordinary, and that's starting to filter through. But I just find it would be interesting, just as a snap in time, to compare from the previous years. If keep that in mind for the next quarter, perhaps, to have a comparative number next to it.
And thank you for sending the email in regard to that. I would have normally tried to get that information for today, but
That's okay.
Without my erstwhile assistant, who's been away ill for a couple of weeks. So.
I think the take-home for me, Madam Chair, is that difference that you've said, an additional 300 over and above what we would normally have in housing. I think that's a take-home. So it means that your department's been very busy, and we've seen that through the timeframes for approvals and what have you. So I guess, is the department seeing you mentioned the federal government funding coming off and the state funding coming off. Are you seeing a trend appearing now? We've seen applications received, in fact, greater than August, 307 applications received. So it makes me think that actually hasn't slowed things up.
Yeah. Now, in terms of the tailing off, that's to do with housing. The other applications relate to a whole plethora of other applications for takeaway food, to mention one, but a whole range of small shops or factories or various matters that require a land use approval. And they're up this year, plumbing and building and the whole lot. It's up in those figures. So, but in terms of, specifically in terms of housing, certainly they've come off the boil a bit, certainly the approvals. And there's a lot of housing out there that's in stasis at the moment because of either labour shortages or materials shortages. Although I notice some of them are starting to move again, but there has been a couple of months where obviously they put a roof on it, put the isolation around the house, and then the builders have gone away to another job because lack of materials or whatever. But all that's going through the system now. And builders' books are full for the whole of next year as well. So it will be a continuation from that one initiative of the federal government. And, but there is definitely a tailing off in the housing.
Councillor McMahon?
Thank you, Chair. Stuart, I also appreciated the quarterly update snapshot. Just wondering, there's probably a very easy, short answer to it. The infrastructure charge is issued and we've only collected roughly half of that. That's standard process?
Yes.
Good, thank you. I'll leave it at that. Good.
Okay. You don't want an explanation?
Well, perhaps, Stuart, you might be able to explain why there's a difference in the two figures and what's when the infrastructure charge, when they're collected.
Yep. Just very quickly, in that case, the 8.5 million relates to the notices that are going out, the infrastructure charges notices, the ICNs as they're called, go out with the approval, with the planning approval. And then when the use or the subdivision or whatever it is finally done, like the plan is sealed, for example, we then get infrastructure charges into the bank.
Right, so that could be several years apart.
It could be several years, particularly in terms of land, of uses of buildings. If they're building buildings and it's not until commencement of use that we actually get the infrastructure charge payable. And that could be 2 years after the notice has gone out. Yeah. So the notices are not invoices that have to be paid within 30 days or something like that. They're actually a notice to pay. And that if it is 2 years later, there's an escalation figure in there for CPI.
Thank you.
Councillor Bonhomme?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you. Thank you, Stuart. Stuart, this month I was thinking about the data that we see in these reports, and you were talking just then about how the builders' books are full for next year.
Yep.
What forward projections do we have, and how, if we have any, and how reliable is that data? I know that there's a lot of unknowns that would factor in there, but do we forward project plan
If you're talking about growth projections, yep.
Well,
there's-
even not just growth projections, but rather, some of these, development applications, dwellings approved.
Yep.
Do we go down to that level and plan out, project out?
We do with the growth projections, but there's a lot of, as you mentioned, unknowns, but they're known unknowns. And because of that, we actually have generally three projections. You have your
Low,
high,
medium, high,
medium and low. And often or not, what we've been finding is we're striking a point or a route between the medium and the high. But overall growth in certainly general population growth and other growth has been around that 1% for a very, very long time. Just year on year on year. Of course, that's a compounding figure, but nonetheless, it's around that 1%, 1.5%. It'll be a bit higher this year, no doubt, but not a great deal higher.
Supplementary.
But we
if
do,
I'm right.
sorry to answer your question, we do projections. We'll be talking to you in terms of the growth strategy, and again, we will be talking to you about what that's based on in terms of projections, in terms of population, housing and jobs.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, but those growth projections, correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't they multi-year projections, multi-decade projections?
Out to 2051.
Yeah. So do we have anything more immediate? In January, these are the numbers of development applications we expect. These are the numbers of dwellings.
No, we don't do that. No, because that's really short. I mean, a developer could come in tomorrow with 1,000-lot subdivision or 1,100-lot subdivision.
So we don't have visibility of any of that until it lands on our desks.
We know because of pre-lodgements and things like that. We know what's in the pipeline, put it that way. If it's pre-pipeline, if I can put it that way, we don't have much of an idea other than hearsay that goes on. You hear the murmurings and the vibrations on the vines. But we then have where there's initial RAL applications and things like that, or surveyors coming in, planners coming in to talk through potential applications. Could be, KFC somewhere or whatever, and they come in and talk to us in a pre-lodgement. And usually between pre-lodgement and the actual lodgement of an application is 3 or 4 months for the developers to get their plans in place and get the various consultants' reports and things that they need. At the moment, that's dragging out a bit because everybody in the industry is busy, really busy.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Councillor Shine.
Thanks, Stuart, for your report. I noticed that the housing approvals are down from last month, but the units are up tenfold. And from the trends earlier this month in your department, are we seeing a resurrection of unit popularity coming our way? Or?
Dare I say, a swallow maketh not the summer. And I think it's and we're finding that we're bouncing along the bottom, I think you could say. We're ranging between 3 units or no units or 10 units, that's luxury. But basically we're getting, it's pretty miserable in terms of the comparison with detached housing and owner occupants. Most of those detached or owner occupancy houses, they're first home buyers or they're people that are building a new house to move up in the world. So it's an issue that we are looking very closely at, and we'll be coming to council to talk to council about possible ways forward in terms of trying to get a better outcome in terms of the medium density outcomes, because that's one of the issues that's irritating that problem of lack of rental accommodation. Of course, people build units to sell generally to investors. About 50% goes to investors, 50% to owner occupancy in terms of medium density. That 50%, of course, are often mums and dad investors here or Sydney or Brisbane or wherever, and they go onto the rental market pretty much straight away. So a reduction in that medium density doesn't help the rental market.
Stuart, just going back to Councillor Von Hoff's question, and I think this is a really good forum for you to make a comment. There's so much in the media about not being enough land available here. So, you know, and it's all being swirled into the low vacancy rate and all of that. So just can you make a comment about if someone is wanting to build a house, how much land is available for these people to be able to build a house if they are financially able to?
There's really no shortage of available lots at the moment. I guess one of our major developers at the moment has probably stalled slightly due to approval problems with more the state government than anything else. But generally, developers who have land are certainly meeting the market at the moment, both in the north and in the south. So if someone's looking for a house lot, there's really no issue there, unless they're looking for a house lot in a specific area, say an existing residential area or something like that, and they come up occasionally, but generally there's no issue there.
And just a further comment, if you could, about, I guess Councillor Von Hoff was saying, if I've got this correct, do we know what's coming? Do we know what's coming down towards us? So commenting on the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the South East Queensland Regional Plan, that we do know what's coming to us, so it's not that we're stabbing around in the dark.
No, that's right. Yeah. We do. They're slightly longer term, and we have those two indicators. We have what's in the pipeline, what's coming through the process, and it's not a short process. You know, getting approvals for each stage takes between 3 and 6 months by the time the developer gets their consultants to design the estate, design all the engineering stuff, and then lodge it with council, and then council takes a couple of months to approve all that, make sure it's all kosher, and then issues the approval. So there is a time lapse there, but at the moment it's all coinciding. And at the same time, there is definitely a reduction in the flow of applications for houses, and we'll start to see that in terms of, often they get a bit of an overshoot where you get the developers who, because there is that 6-month lapse, they overshoot the demand that's in the market, and the demand slips away. Of course, they've committed themselves to constructing those estates, and it's not in the interest of developers to be building extra stages that they won't be able to sell within a very short time, because it's very expensive, 30, 40, 50 million dollars per stage. That's a lot of money to have hanging out there and not be able to sell the product and move it.
And just in terms of our vacancy rate, is that, it's below 1% here, is that something that's new? I thought that our vacancy rate's been fairly consistent over the last few years. Yep,
it's slowly, in the last 5 years, it's probably gone from about 2.5%, 3% to about 0.6% at the moment. It hovered around that 1.5% for a couple of years, and but it's down. It is quite low at the moment, but it's a common issue across Queensland and also across Australia generally. There seems to be, I think, a number of things are happening here. One is that house prices and established house prices have gone up reasonably substantially compared to the last 5 to 10 years. Certainly the last 5 years. So there's been a bit of a hike in established houses, and a lot of the mum and dad investors in particular who have bought houses out there in the inner suburbs, both in Toowoomba and Brisbane and elsewhere, have sold them. They put them on the market. It's a hot market, and they can sell the houses within a day or two at a lot more than they might have been able to sell that house for a year ago. So they're doing that, and that's reducing often, because those houses are often bought by owner-occupants, and the owner-occupants, if it's owner-occupied, that means it's not available for rental. So there's those squeezes combined with the reduction or the lacklustre medium density market. It's you know, with the combination of things, we're in trouble. The other compounding problem there, of course, is public investment in rental accommodation. There's been, over the last 10 or 15 years, there's been a bit of a lull in public investment in housing.
Mm-hmm. For the state investment, yeah. All right, thank you for that. Any further questions? Can I have someone move that the report be noted by Councillor McDonald, Councillor Antonio? All those in favour? Thank you. Can I have someone move an adjournment, that we adjourn the meeting? Councillor Taylor and Councillor Von Hoff. All those in favour? It's carried. Water and waste.
Welcome to the Water and Waste Committee meeting of Toowoomba Regional Council for November. This meeting is open to the public and will also be live streamed. Thank you to everybody who's in the room here today. I will note Councillor Summerfield's apology. That's already been... Do we need a second? Do we need to do anything move with that? Okay. And there being no items on the agenda today, I promptly close the Water and Waste Committee meeting for November. Thanks.
Sorry, help if I got the microphone on. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Infrastructure Committee meeting of the Toowoomba Regional Council. Our meeting's open to the public and will also be live streamed. I'd like to thank those of you in the room with us today and acknowledge everyone watching via Council's social media channels, recognising Councillor Melissa Taylor, the Portfolio Leader for Infrastructure Services. I acknowledge the Aboriginal parties whose songlines traverse the lands we meet on today, the Western Waka Waka, the Gabal and the Jadawar peoples, and the Biggambill people who have land rights to our western part of our shire. And I pay respects to their elders past, present and emerging, for they hold the knowledge, the rich traditions and the bold ambitions of Australia's First Peoples. We have an apology. Do we need to have an apology all the way through to... Can I have a motion that we accept an apology? The Mayor for Councillor Nancy Summerfield and Councillor Melissa Taylor. And those in favour? Thank you. Are there any applications for leave of absence? I don't think so. And we have a declaration. Councillor McDonald?
Thanks, Madam Chair. Through you to the chamber. This refers to item number 3, the Toowoomba City Centre Car Parking Strategy Implementation Project, City Centre Paid Parking Implementation. I inform this meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter as defined in section 150 EN of the Local Government Act 2009. The nature of my interest is as follows. The declarable conflict of interest arises because I am part owner of property at 435 Ruthven Street and 2 Club Lane, Toowoomba. In making this declaration, I consider that the item is an ordinary business matter and that my interest is no greater than all property owners and business owners in the CBD. I wish to participate in the decision in relation to this matter. I acknowledge that eligible councillors must now determine, pursuant to sections 150 ES of the Local Government Act 2009, whether I, 1, may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter, 2, must leave the meeting, including any area set aside for the public, and stay away from the meeting while the eligible councillors discuss and vote on the matter, or 3, may participate in the decision about the matter subject to conditions.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Is there any change, councillors, in that status?
Well, this is, I might make comment on that.
Yes, thank you,
If
Councillor
If
McDonald.
you wouldn't mind. Councillors, you'll note in the latest, or the update on the councillor conduct or conflicts of interest, and it's in our guide here, just by way of some level of interest for councillors. It's in section 2 of your folders, and it's on the front page, or there's 2 pages, in fact, in section 2. And I refer attention to perhaps the centre of that page where it talks about ordinary business. Pardon me, ordinary business.
Yes.
Your interest is no greater than a significant proportion of the community members, e.g. all members in a suburb or people in a small town, all business owners or dog owners. That's unusual. Councillor remuneration expenses, superannuation insurance, adoption of the budget rates and charge, etc., etc., planning scheme or amendments, appointment of mayor, deputy mayor, so and so. So it's really that first dot point.
Yes.
It's really that first dot point. In the past, and we have record of this, that I actually have removed myself from the room for some of these discussions. However, that change in the conflicts and declarable conflicts, or prescribed conflicts actually, gave rise to me bringing this forward for a determination by councillors today.
Thank you, Councillor McDonald. And I just note that in that, and in here it says, I acknowledge that eligible councillors must now determine, pursuant to Section 150 ES of the Local Government Act 2009. So that indicates that council still has to
That's right.
decide now. So I guess it's in councillors' hands.
But if there's any questions...
If there's any change,
councillors
any
have
questions of Councillor McDonald? No? So is someone prepared to move? Thank you, Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, and seconded by Councillor Melissa Taylor. Those in favour? That the matter stays the same, and we don't believe that Councillor McDonald has any more to gain or lose than anybody else that's here in the room. Thank you. And
just confirm.
thank you.
I do confirm that we've gone with option 1, that he may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter.
Thank you.
That was
Thank
the
you. That's
that was the
the
motion.
Yeah, and the reasons would be as per the chair has mentioned, which is around the
Yes.
ordinary business item, dot point 1.
And I believe that's the intention of the council. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McDonald. Councillor...
Yep.
Yes, we did, and it was unanimous. Councillor Melissa Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. My declaration is also with item 3, to the Toowoomba City Centre Car Parking Strategy Implementation Project, City Centre Paid Parking Implementation. I inform this meeting that I have a declarable conflict of interest in this matter as defined in Section 150 EN of the Local Government Act 2009. The nature of my interest is as follows. This declarable conflict of interest arises because a person who is a related party of mine has an interest in this matter. The particulars: the name of the related party, Christine Taylor. The nature of my relationship with the related party is Christine Taylor is my sister. And the nature of the related party's interest in this matter are that Christine Taylor owns the property at Suite 6 in the Old Chronicle Arcade in the Toowoomba CBD. I wish to participate in the decision in relation to this matter. I acknowledge that eligible councillors must now determine, pursuant to Section 150 ES of the Local Government Act 2009, whether I, 1, may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter, 2, must leave the meeting, including any area set aside for the public, and stay away from the meeting while the eligible councillors discuss and vote on the matter, or 3, may participate in the decision about the matter subject to conditions. And I will just make the same comment that Councillor McDonald just made to dot point 1. So I don't, where am I? I have no greater interest to gain or lose from the decisions made here today.
Thank you, Councillor Melissa Taylor, and it's an ordinary matter of council as we go
That's
forward.
the word I was looking for.
So if Council, Mr Mayor, you're happy to move that, thank you, and may participate in the decision about the matter, including by voting on the matter. Seconded, Councillor Megan O'Hara-Sullivan. Those in favour? It's carried. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor McDonald and Councillor Melissa Taylor.
Thank you.
So we move on to, Rod, can I ask you to come up? Item 3, which is the Toowoomba City Centre car parking strategy implementation. And I'll ask Rodney Betts, the Manager of Transport and Drainage Planning, to introduce the matter to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor, and good morning, councillors. Over the last 12 months or so, we brought you a number of information sessions and reports on our smart parking implementation project. At the last information session, we advised that we would bring forward a report on parking fees and charges ahead of our go-live date, our planned date of July next year, and this is the report before you now. At that time, we also advised that we were entering into a 3-month period of interactive tender negotiations with 3 preferred suppliers of smart parking technology, and we are currently in the final rounds of negotiations leading up to awarding this tender in the next 2 to 3 weeks. And our project manager, James Hayward, is actually an apology this morning as he's leading one of these final negotiation sessions as we talk. Now, I expect that a number of councillors will have potentially some detailed questions as to how this smart parking will all work, but I think from our information sessions and reports, we all have a fairly general understanding of this technology. So I would like to ask that we respect the current stage of these confidential and commercial tender negotiations, and accordingly I may have to take some of your questions on notice. However, in that context, we are planning to hold a council information session early in the new year, where I'm hoping we will be able to take a deep dive into these details with the successful provider of these services, and I'm sure we'll be able to respond to your questions with greater clarity at that time. However, that said, the purpose of today's report is really just to confirm the directions that have been indicated in the Toowoomba City Centre car parking strategy the Council endorsed in December 2019, particularly in relation to the parking fees and charges that will accompany our go-live date of July 2022 for smart parking. Now, in the same way that we have been proposing no change to the current mix of parking time limits on street, we are not proposing any changes to the quantum of the parking fees and charges which were revised for this current financial year and which we would normally review every 2 years. However, we are seeking confirmation that as per Council's endorsed strategy, the currently free parking where that historically occurs within the city centre become paid parking, and we're also proposing that the first 30 minutes of this be free. A decision on this matter will greatly support us to hit the ground running early next year once we've engaged our successful provider. And as per Council's parking strategy, the intent of this change is about encouraging the appropriate turnover of spaces and the visible availability of spaces in the city centre, while still giving customers a reasonable period of free parking to support the many activities and businesses that go on around our city centre. So while the report does mention additional revenue potentially arising from this, the numbers reported are estimates based on our present knowledge of current parking patterns, and this may change once payment is introduced. Hence, I would suggest those numbers might best be viewed as an indication of a possible upper limit rather than necessarily a target. So councillors, may I commend the report and its recommendations for your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod. And this isn't to re-prosecute the case. This is just to go forward through the next gateway, I suppose. Councillor Megan O'Hara-Sullivan.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Rodney, just remind me, if we are trying to encourage the turnover, how long, if it does become paid parking, how long can someone stay in that park if they just keep paying over and over?
Well, I think as we previously indicated, we're not proposing any changes to the current 1 hour and 2 hour arrangements on street, and that would mean that if someone stayed longer than 1 hour in an hour space, they would actually be overstaying the limit. So we're not proposing at this point to change or review those time limits, simply to understand how this introduction of payment will encourage or discourage certain parking activities from happening in those areas. So where you can currently park for 1 hour, you will continue to be able to park for 1 hour. Where you can park for 2 hours, you continue to be able to park for 2 hours.
But you're not paying for the first half an hour?
That's correct. You would still need to, I guess, register for the space, either on your phone or at a machine, to say, I am the vehicle parked in this space. But if you intend to stay longer, you will have the opportunity to pay for that at the time you do that.
So just remind me, maybe I'm, not very bright, but why is that going to encourage a turnover?
Look, the indications for many studies that we've done in the past suggest that irrespective of the maximum time limit on the car park, the majority of parking activities are actually around half of that signed time limit. And the importance of the time limit, as we found in the city centre, with particularly the 1 hour centre parking, is that it does discourage that historical habit of longer term parking and simply shuffling the cars from one area to another. So I think the current mix of time limits that we've got has been one of our more successful endeavours to deal with those sorts of issues. And simply by ensuring, like, I think what we're doing is we're trying to acknowledge the parking pattern that we understand presently exists there. People can park in the 1 and 2 hour parking for free at the moment, but our studies would indicate that many of those customers are simply parking for around half that time limit, hence our suggestion that the first 30 minutes be free, and hence no impact on numbers of those existing customers.
Happy with that? Councillor Lonhoff?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, thank you, Rodney. I want to refer to point 2 in the strategic plan, and that is parking technology, to employ best practice technology, and these are the important words, to maximise customer experience and assist the city's management of parking. And I sit down in the call centre every month, and I genuinely can't tell you how many times I've heard people call in and say, I've got a parking ticket because I didn't have cash. Mm-hmm. And now I've got this $60 ticket, and I don't think it's reasonable that in COVID I'm expected to carry cash. And I've also heard that the card-only machines manufacture more frequently in wet weather as well. So I've got 2 questions. The first is, could you give your opinion, please, on the extent to which you are comfortable that we have satisfied currently that maximise customer experience element?
Certainly a very strong focus of our specifications and negotiations have been around the capability of the various providers to provide that experience. And one of the reasons that we have gone to a preferred supplier approach is, as previously indicated, that simply that is the best way, the most effective way that the customer experience can be integrated with the management of the parking, and it's all in one system and it all talks to each other.
You're talking about the smart meter?
The smart parking,
yep.
Yes.
Yep.
So, look, the current situation is that we still have around 370 single bay meters out on street, and they are certainly coin only. They are obsolete technology, and we are looking to replace the majority, if not all of those, as part of what we're doing. We presently have only 13 coin-only machines, and the remaining 81 machines are credit and coin. I think what we tend to find with a lot of customer inquiries is that they'll use every shred of evidence they can to support their position. In terms of tickets sticking in wet weather, we do monitor the availability of machines, and it's been reported back to us each month through the websites which these machines report to that overall we do have in excess of 99% availability of machines. So certainly it may be that people are using that, and they may actually be having an instance where they have encountered a period where through the moisture in the atmosphere the paper in the machine has become wet and it's tended to jam and not drop to the slot. But that is admittedly from what we can see with the maintenance an exception rather than the norm. And certainly in terms of customer experience, I think we find that once there is better data and information that people can see is available and shows what has actually occurred, the prevalence of people to sort of test the system tends to wane.
Okay. My second question, if I might, Chair. So you've hit on exactly my point, and the question then is, Can you explain the justification of the timing of advancing what's before us today as opposed to waiting until the smart parking technology has been implemented and those problems with customer experience have been eradicated?
Look, I think simply we've put forward the position that Council endorsed in its strategy. There are any number of permutations and combinations that one could put on this exercise, which is why we're endeavouring to clarify this now so that we do have that clear path forward, whatever that path may be, as we move forward with actually delivering the system. It is a convenient time to be able to introduce the payment as well as the 30 minutes free, 30 hours. And as these were the timelines indicated in the strategy endorsed back in 2019, we're simply checking in with Council that's still the approach you wish to follow.
Thank you.
Councillor McDonald, sorry. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Madam Chair.
Came through a little bit louder, sorry.
No, that's fine. Through you to Rod. Rod, you mentioned earlier about some questions that we probably shouldn't touch on because of confidentiality and the process of why we're here today, which is to go out to tender. So if I'm asking a question that might be on that edge, just let me know that, because they're questions that I think the community would like to know before Council actually commits to spending the dollars. Touches a little bit on what Councillor Von Hoff mentioned and Councillor O'Hara-Sullivan, and that's there will be some level of confusion until people understand what Council's actually committing to. So just from a technical perspective and practicalities, this would come in from July next year.
Yes.
And so by July next year, the areas that Councillor Von Hoff's mentioned around making sure that smart technology is in place and is operating and working, and the stakeholder engagements happen, the explanation of how it's done, that will all have, the program is that will all have been completed before it's in place.
Yes.
Okay.
So we have a fairly detailed community engagement plan already. That elements of that have been brought forward to coincide with this morning's report. But certainly all of the negotiations with all three providers at this point have asked those exact same questions. This is our plan go live date. Can you confirm your ability to deliver on or ahead of time? Because I think we'd all appreciate that with any new system, there does need to be a commissioning period with it. We've asked questions of can you guarantee your supply chains with COVID impacts and these sorts of things, and we're being assured that all three of them can. And they're all keen to basically finalise the negotiations, find out who the preferred supplier is, and potentially even get working very closely with us in the weeks leading up to Christmas. So,
Councillors, I just must mention here, sorry Rodney, but it says there to seek Council's approval to convert existing on-street free parking to paid parking in the financial year 2022-23 within the city centre, and inform Council of the planned stakeholder engagement activities which is attached to your report. And it's actually a fees and charges matter only at this point. So just...
No, that's okay. I think just the public deserves some sort of confidence as well. So just on the fees and charges then, Rod, and it's mentioned that it's already in there, and you talked about the upper limit of $1.90 is mentioned in the report per hour. Will this technology then have the capacity, and it's been in previous reports or sessions, have the capacity to adjust pricing as a result of supply and demand, which would then put us in line of activating the off-street parking a little more? Is that part of this mix for the tenderers to look at?
Certainly all of those elements are there. The ability of these systems to understand real-time what parking is occurring out there through sensors in the ground and other devices. The ability to, in the old days, these machines needed a programmable chip that you inserted on a certain part of the circuit board every time you changed tariffs. These days it's all programmable over 3G, 4G. So certainly the technology is there to better understand what parking is occurring street by street even, and hence in the fullness of time we may have a more sophisticated approach to parking than we currently have. We have a fairly simple one size fits all at this point. We didn't want to overcomplicate it. But those are the possibilities that as we move forward, if we find a particular area is in very high demand for parking, and you don't have a reasonable chance of finding a space there should you wish to visit businesses in that area, that is an area that in time we would seek to increase in pricing, but conversely lower the price of parking in an area that's not having that same level of use. And that gets people walking more in the CBD. And as we all know, motorists in cars don't spend money. It's people on the footpath with a wallet in their pocket who may drop into a shop on the way and conduct some business.
So can I just one last question in regard to that?
But just point out that the second paragraph in the Executive Assembly summary actually mentions that.
Yeah.
Thank
Just
you.
one last question in regard to that. So, Rod, you're confident that our current fees and charges will allow for that to happen, and not just the $1.90, but other car parking pricing?
Look, I think for 2022-23, we're just proposing to go with what we have. I think the learning will then occur over the next 6 to 12 months, so that when we move into 23-24, we may provide some wording or other mechanism in the fees and charges that then allows that flexibility to happen perhaps more operationally than by an annual decision to council, but that's part of our learning curve with it.
Thank you, Councillor Jeff. Councillor Shine, and then Councillor James.
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Just a simple question. I think you mentioned before that the studies show that people only stay about half the time that they're allowed to stay, say the 1 hour free parking that we have at the moment, and we're proposing to change it to 30 minutes free, which is half that time. Why are we doing that if they're already going after 30 minutes anyway?
I think we're just picking up on some previous discussions and talks that there is an interest in some form of free period, given that we have private car parking providers who do provide up to 3 hours free parking. So simply trying to provide a mechanism that we are giving that consideration. But it may also, I guess, encourage use of spaces, more of those spaces for those shorter term activities, and generally trying to lift the turnover in the town, which is only a good thing.
So if I might, would the logic be that if it's to reduce to 30 minutes, people will stay for 15 rather?
Yes and no. I think people are conscious that at times they can get a little bit delayed in what they may have thought was a fairly quick sort of duck into the shops and back out. They can get held up at the cashiers or take a bit longer to find what they're looking for. So I think the maximum limit certainly does influence how people approach that. Yeah. But I think what we've found is that generally, whilst there was a lot of discussion around the time that the 1 hour came in again, it has worked reasonably successfully for the last 12 to 18 months, and we're not getting a lot of comment around that at the moment, that it's not the right time limit.
And I had a parking fine last week because what it will do will make people think that perhaps they're longer, so they should go somewhere else. Yeah. It's a turnover, and it did work when we went back to an hour.
Could I follow up? Just a little sneaky, quick one. For how long is it envisaged under the strategy that the free parking, down to 30 minutes, will last? Is that a temporary thing or is it long term?
The parking doesn't get necessarily down to that level of detail. The direction in the strategy is at the highest level simply saying that parking pricing can be a tool that you can use to encourage people to park in some locations other than others, and that very much comes back to people's personal choices around how much are they prepared to pay versus what time they have available versus how far they're prepared to walk. But at least with these systems, provided they don't use their mobile phone in their car and they check before they start their journey, they will be able to see reasonably clearly in real time where parking is available. And if they wish to have longer parking in the CBD, we have Central Car Park, which is there at 3 hours, and some of our outlying car parks that are up to 8 hours. They'll be able to see the availability in Harry's Water, possibly Clifford Russell, potentially Station Street. So they'll be able to see the availability in those longer term car parks, and that hopefully will encourage people to use those off-street car parks for those longer term activities and free the on-street parking up for that higher demand, higher turnover activity.
And of course, if they don't know, I mean, you've got the 3 hour at the present anyway in the shopping centre, where if you do go over for some reason, will you just pay a matter of what's owing? You're right, Councillor Shine. Thank you. Councillor James.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thanks, Rod. A few questions around this one. I understand the intent and what we're trying to achieve through this, but my concern around the initial straight up as our first thing is to charge for centre parking to try and ensure turnover and things like this, where, did you say before the data or what we've seen in the last 12 to 18 months since we've gone back to an hour has essentially done that? So I suppose tacking a fee onto that, how's that really solve anything?
The data is as much anecdotal as it is evidentiary at this point in time. And again, I guess what we're trying to say is let's change as little as possible while people are, learning this new technology. So rather than disturb time limits and disturb pricing and everything up front and everything's up in the air, we're simply trying to say these things will continue through as they have been, but you'll now have a phone to pay. You'll now have better machines to pay it, credit card and these sorts of things. So we're really focused on, as Councillor Von Hoff said, trying to improve that customer experience, trying to improve their understanding of where parking is available with as little change as possible to what we're currently doing. Too many changes at the same time and you don't know what factor has influenced what. So it's simply trying to keep the playing field as level as we can while we introduce it and then use the system to learn how we might be able to make the experience even better for our customers and for ourselves.
Okay, yeah, and understand that and respect that point of view, but I think taking something from free to charge is a major change to me. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think that is a major change for what we're doing. And why I question it is, like when we talked about here and the actual, those key points of what we're looking to achieve through this, and one of them is, well, the key one I think we're all talking about is the highest and best use of the city's parking assets. So if we think the highest and best use of our premium parking assets, the free ones in the middle of the city, are at a charge, and we're talking about price demand points where we can change things, well, we know what we know, and we've done a number of studies with this, and we know, I can tell you now, unless you can tell me they've changed, they're embedded in my brain. I know the occupancy of, generally speaking, of Water Street probably sits today at 60%, Station Street probably sits at about 70%, Bus Interchange sits at probably 80%, Macrum Lane sits at probably 55%, and our peak ones down here will be 110%, meaning those Neil and Annan Street ones. So we know, do you know what I mean? We know where the demand was, and I've often been an advocate behind, if we want people to utilise them, isn't the price point the opportunity to use it? So whilst, if we're going to come in now and say, hey, you're going to pay this for this now, but did you know that there's probably, of the 415 parks in Water Street, which is just over there, there's probably, that's probably 40% unoccupied. The fee to use that is, and set it at a price point where it actually has an impact and it's a meaningful reason to use it based on price, similar to Central. I mean, we've seen a massive turnaround on it when it's gone back to $1 an hour.
Mm-hmm. Look, I think the reality of it is that the strategy is about using pricing as a driver to encourage different locations of parking. And while your premium, closest, most convenient parking continues to be free, it really doesn't matter what you do in those outlying areas. You won't get that shift in where people are parking.
Yeah, okay. Can I ask just one more? Sorry, Madam Chair, I know there's quite a few. And the only other one I just want to ask, Rod, if I can, please, looking at the stakeholder plan that obviously comes post this. So I take it this is very much so if we make this decision today or next week that, yep, this is where we're going, it's not a consultation, it's information. This is what we're doing. And secondly, what is the point around, sorry, I haven't got it in front of me, but the point there where it said that one of the key aspects of it is explaining to the community how their input helped us to reach this decision. What was that?
Okay,
Please.
The strategy itself back in December 19 was prefaced by a couple of years of studies and surveys that were actually undertaken by SPED, if you recall at the time, as part of the city centre master planning. and hence the strategy itself was the product of those engagements with the community at that time. So it's part of the engagement strategy is to bring that, I guess, history forward a little bit to remind people that is, you know, the strategy has been there for 2 years. It's taken us this amount of time to get to the point of being able to implement it. But just reconfirming the reasons that we listened to back at the time leading up to the strategy in 2019 are still there. And we've listened to those reasons, and that's why we're bringing in smart parking and doing it the way we're doing it.
Can I add to that there's a few businesses in town who've always wanted paid parking, and particularly in that western end of Margaret Street when they've been flogged by QIC and other things, and people still shift cars even at an hour, and their customers need more than an hour anyway, so they would prefer that there was paid parking so that people can, if they do need to jump in, can just go inside. So not all the community will be against this. There has been myriads of consultations right back to when QIC was Grand Central was being built, and it was so difficult to get a park for the utes, the construction utes that were down there in the centre parking.
Yeah.
So,
Well, let's suggest, just on that, if I may, Madam Chair, the last question we asked them was around the 1 hour parking control back on the October 2019, and the only responses we got back to changing it to paid was if it was longer than an hour.
and how many responses? I mean, we didn't get. I think it's interesting, and I think that you know it's a no-win situation with parking because everyone comes from their own perspective. But the fact of the matter is, at the moment, we have 3-hour parking at the shopping centre, and we have $1 an hour at Central. And people, it's a matter of education, I think, of people. And if, at the half an hour, the paper shop and places like that where people just go in and out, they're very happy with that.
But I mean, Madam Chair, just following, I'll say, I'm 39 years of age, and I think for 38 years of those I've been hearing about education is what we need to do around this topic, maybe longer. I just think this is, all I'm getting at is that I think this is a really good opportunity where we need to get the best outcome. And we haven't even addressed the elephant in the room if people want to talk about the requirement or potential requirement of more long-term parking with the influx of whether it be shop top living or other businesses that we want to attract to a CBD. I mean, this is, you know, this is on the table today, but this is a pretty big journey that we're on here to try and, you know, and we're going to make a large investment in. Sorry, I'm probably getting into debate, Madam Chair, but if we're going to make a large investment, I just feel that we need to achieve the maximum outcome, the best that we can, for exactly what we said here, best use for our community.
And Councillor O'Shea, this isn't the first time Council's seen this. This is in 2019, and this is a strategy that we're just taking forward.
Yeah,
so you know,
it's a significant
I mean,
part of it today.
It has
this is
happened.
a significant decision in the journey.
It's just the next stage. Councillor Melissa.
Big one.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Rod. Just talking about parking, and it is all about customer experience, and it's also about the business experience. And when I walk the streets of the city centre and I talk to business owners, the major frustration for the business owners in this city is that there is constant, and I mean constant, they've showed me photos of registrations of cars that go from one car park to the other when they're hour parking because they're free, and they go from one park to the other. So that's actually limiting customer experience within the city. So if we're trying to encourage visitors into our city centre, for those that want to go into a shop and spend less than an hour, then there's no opportunity, or there's a lesser opportunity because there's business owners and staff parking in those 1 hour car parks and they're shuffling their cars. And this doesn't happen just one day a week or one morning a week. This happens all day, every day. And many businesses have showed me photographic evidence of that. So when we're talking about customer experience and business experience, there isn't going to be customer experience if we don't have shops open in our city, because the car parks that should be there for customers are being taken by the staff and business owners of other businesses within the city. So in saying that, I think something like this will actually discourage people from shuffling their cars, because then they're going to have to pay for that extra half hour. And if there's the ability or opportunity for customers to then park in the city and go in and do their half hour or hour shopping, then they have the opportunity. And if there's customers that want to shop for longer, they want to go and get their hair done, girls, that take 2.5 hours, or you want to have a 2-hour long lunch with a glass of wine, then pop into Grand Central Shopping Centre or pop into Central Car Parking, because it's $1 an hour, and that then allows the other people who want to pop in for an hour into the city centre. I think this will actually encourage more people to visit our city centre, because the car parks won't be taken up by shufflers, or what I refer to as shufflers in the city. Council have actually done some great work in making accessibility of car parks, the car parking centres, Central, Annan Street, we've got Kwang Sang Walk and Carnival Lane now, and many accessible points into our city centre, and those other car parking areas and those accessibilities allow customers to park longer if they want to be shopping in the city centre longer. But I think this actually increases the customer experience in the city, because it'll actually make it more accessible for people to come into our city and get a car park.
Point of order, Madam Chair. Was there a question there from Councillor Taylor, or was that a comment? And if it was a question, is there evidence that we're considering that supports her assertion about the encouragement or the discouragement of shuffling the parking spots?
Councillor Vonhoff, I don't believe we've had questions from too many of the comments to date. I think Councillor Melissa was talking about bringing up the point of, possibly in reply to Councillor James, that there are people that are still moving cars despite it going back from 2 hours to 1 hour.
But are we in question time, or have we moved into debate?
We're not in debate. If we need to go into debate, we will. At the moment, we're just taking question and comment.
Thanks. I was going to just ask a question to confirm about customer experience. Rod, can you just confirm it was only 13 parking metre heads that are coin only?
From the pay and display machines, yes, that's the older silver ones.
Yeah, so there's only 13 cash only in the city centre.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Tim?
Thanks, Chair. This is a question, and I suppose it ties in with the comments by both Councillor James and Councillor Melissa. We obviously have gone from 2 hours to 1 hour now, paid after half an hour, and I agree that we need to stop the shuffling of, how business can be productive when you've got your shuffling car parks every hour. But if I'm the average shopper and I come into Ruthven Street straight outside of here, and now I've got to, if it's $1.90 an hour and I've got to pay for half, so fine, whether it's credit card or cash, put 80 cents in a machine plus the only 1 hour. I wonder if this is an unjustifiable hardship on the average customer that's going to discourage them actually coming into the CBD. I wonder if we've gone a little bit further that way. I would love comment on your position on that, please.
Well, essentially all of these systems have a phone app that accompanies the system. So people will have a choice of, when they pull into a car park, the system will be able to see, understand where that park is located and actually show them that park on their phone app. And they'll then have a choice. It'll inform them what the cost of parking is, what the time limits for parking is, and they can choose to accept. They will have to enter their registration number, because it will be a pay-by-plate system, so that we can get information on the registrations of the vehicles using those, and that will be another way that we'll be able to see some of those parking patterns that we've been talking about. So for those who choose to take up the phone app, that'll be a fairly straightforward straightforward sort of process. I think everybody has been conditioned through COVID to, oh, I've got to walk into that shop, I've got to do the check-in thing. So really it's one small aspect of how we use our phones and go around our business these days. So from that perspective, that's very much an enhancement for the customer experience.
So, Rod, if I could just, what about the people, and there are a few still, who don't use their phones?
We will have machines strategically located. Obviously, we'll be trying to get the right balance of numbers of machines and costs for customer convenience. But we will have machines that still have the credit card and coin capability so we'll actually have more forms of payment than we currently have.
Thank you. Follow up, yeah.
Thanks for that, Rod. May I follow up? I'm not re-prosecuting by any means, but being someone who is generally tech savvy, if I come to my 1 hour park here and then I open my app, find my park, enter my rego, enter my credit card for 80 cents, this is 15 minutes work for a half hour park. I just wonder if the overall package that we offer still doesn't, it's not too hard.
And look, that's why I'd probably prefer that sort of question when we actually have the supplier here. We'll be able to say this is how my app works. I would think they all have the capability to, like numbers of applications, pre-populate your data. So that if you're in that car normally, it may well be able to pull up your licence plate and things from a sort of pre-filled
Thanks.
form.
I think we can have that convo.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
So I think we are spending a bit of time. We've got Councillor Antonio, Councillor Bill and Councillor Megan had a question, I think.
The only matter that I wanted to discuss very briefly, I think the previous speakers have certainly covered the issue of people swapping car parks all the time, and that's been an ongoing issue ever since there was charging. And it's a nuisance. But Councillor James and I, in the previous term, we did a fair bit of work with people who were looking at investing in commercial car parks. One of our issues, I think, is that we're a bit too generous as a council in terms of charging. But interestingly, these people had built a car park one of them had built a car park in Darwin, one had built one in Townsville, so they looked at us as being a very similar cohort to them. And they never came back to us, despite the fact that they were aware that they could apply for that infrastructure charges complement that we do and all of that. So I really think that somehow down the track we've got to look pretty hard at having a commercial car park of some sort. How we get there, I don't know. It will probably be by incentive, really. But we need to get many of these people who are working in the main street off the main street and give the commercial people an opportunity to go there and do what they need to do and leave.
And I think, need to be careful. I think it's a return on investment for people because we're in a transition period where we're going from a sleepy city, and there's nothing wrong with that, to being quite a vibrant city. And we need to change the mindset of people that, parking is worth paying for. You don't go anywhere. People from Brisbane come here and they get a parking ticket and it's less than what the day's park is down in Brisbane. So that's the difference. And understand that, not everyone can afford to splash out on car parks. But I think this is a transition and
exactly right.
for that. So
anyway,
we're going, we need to contain it now. And Councillor Bill, I think, and Councillor Megan, and then if we need to start moving forward with this. Thank you.
Just at the end of questioning, I was happy to move the recommendation.
Right, Councillor Bill. Councillor Megan, did you have a question?
Well, I guess I'd like to make a suggestion or move an amendment that if the logic is that we want to create the least disruption to people and confusion, I think that it should be an hour that we're giving that first hour, because then that sort of stays with the status quo. So that's my suggestion or amendment, Madam Chair.
Well, you can't have an amendment until you've got a mover. So, Councillor Carl, you happy to move that? And seconded Councillor Antonio. So, Councillor Carl, did you want to speak to the recommendation, please? No?
Well, Madam Chair, when do I get to move my amendment?
Well, you can move an amendment now.
Okay.
Should you wish.
Okay. Well, I would like that as a recommendation up there, but with an initial 60 minutes of free parking included.
Okay, so the mover and the seconder, do you agree
as
with
it
that
is
in the
now, an
motion, or
hour.
are you going to stick with the motion? Okay, so we'll need to debate the amendment. Seconder for the amendment? Is there a seconder for the amendment? Thank you, Mark.
Just get clarification, I think Councillor
Can I
James.
ask a question of the amendment?
Yes.
Please. Thank you, Madam Chair. So what he's saying, so 60 minutes free, what's the maximum though? So same as what it is now, implement smart parking technology, but it's still free for an hour.
An hour instead of 30 minutes, yeah.
So
We're not transitioning to anything with that. We're not transitioning to anything, and we're going against our strategy. But anyway, that's an amendment that's been moved. Is there a seconder for the amendment? Seconded, Councillor James O'Shea. Do you want to speak to the amendment, Councillor Harrison?
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. I really welcome this this report, and I think how convenient and the whole strategy is fantastic, Rodney. But if the strategy is to, and I'm not against the paid parking in any stretch at all, and I agree with Councillor Taylor that it's an asset that people don't value if it's free, and I understand the shuffling around of the cars and whatever. But if the logic is that we don't want to cause disruption, this to me is the least disruption to people.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Speaker against? The amendment, this is?
It's just a question. I'm
Thank
confused.
you. Why? Councillor Carl?
I'm confused with the amendment. Are we saying that maybe I need to get my hearing checked here.
Yeah.
Are we saying that we implement the smart technology here? We don't go with the officer's recommendation as a transition, as part of a journey, so we give the whole hour free.
I believe that's what the amendment is
Is that the
intending.
amendment?
Yeah.
Yes, Councillor
So
Carl.
then, I guess
As per the report, where the options would be 15 minutes of free, 30 minutes of free, 1 hour of free parking. So that was considered as part of the strategy, wasn't it?
So, okay, then that creates a number of questions for me as with the implementation of the new technology.
So, Councillor Carl, we have an amendment. It's not just about convenience and lack, it's about moving towards paid parking in the city centre, and the strategy says that. So if you want to speak, will you speak against the amendment, please?
I'll speak against the amendment, thanks.
Thank you.
For a number of reasons. From a purely logical point of view, we implement new initiatives and new technology that costs money for a start, so then we forfeit a revenue stream to actually pay for that technology. That's not very logic, point one. Point two, you've already covered, Madam Chair, it's not in keeping with our parking strategy. Point three is, as per the officer's recommendation, I would be happy to accept that option because, maybe we should just go the whole hour and charge for the whole hour. Councillor James mentioned it before. If we're going to set sentiment and parking behaviour, then cost is price is a mechanism, and yet we see here that we're not going to actually use price as a mechanism. We're actually going to give away the most valuable real estate in the CBD for parking free and try to hope to move customers along so other customers can get into businesses. I don't know. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Thank you, Councillor Carl. Speaker for the amendment, Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst not completely on board with this particular amendment, I can support it for a couple of reasons. Madam Chair, the first one being that we've spoken about this at length around the table, and the constant thing we've heard about is been around car shuffling, wrong people using those parks, all those sort of things, and the fines aren't big enough to turn whatever they may be. So at least by using smart parking technology, I'm assuming that would also be, and I know we don't have our smart parking technology people here to probably clarify this, but through the technology, it does provide a mechanism, an opportunity where you can better, find people, I would imagine, because the technology is set there to know exactly how long a person is parked in said parking space. So if our biggest concern is around the shufflers, etc., well, this actually, you're not having this technology put in place just without any purpose. So it certainly helps with the crusade towards that. But secondly, what it does do is then that once it has been implemented, yes, we've talked about how price can be something that can determine behaviours, or that can be used obviously as a way of driving whichever agenda you wish around parking. We're going to consultation, or sorry, information post this anyway. And my concern around that is that if we make this decision today to say, yep, we're going towards this, we're going towards paid parking, we go to consultation and we go and ask the public and we come back with an overwhelming response to say we're not supportive of it, what do we do then? Because even though we say we're informing, people are still going to give us their opinion and say, well, you know, I don't support it because for whatever reasons that they may be. So we do have the possibility of, once we go to the consultation, we are going to be able to hear what people in the community feel about it. We've already got the smart parking technology there, and I feel like it's an opportunity then where we can better be prepared for the overall picture of what we're looking at with parking, with the entire rollout of smart parking. So that's why I can support the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor James. I need to remind you we already have the facility to know when they've, in the CBD, when they've overstayed there. Yeah, sorry. Against the amendment? Councillor Melissa?
Thank you, Chair. So we've talked about using price as a driver to change people's patterns of behaviour, and I don't believe that having an hour parking will change anything. It stays the status quo. So even when you've got technology and the smart parking, if there's an hour free parking, they will continue to shuffle. Shufflers will keep on shuffling, and they'll shuffle all day. We'll just shuffle, 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 because they'll go from one car park to the other, even though the smart technology is there, because they've gone from one car park when that hour's up to the next car park. And then when that hour's up, then they'll shuffle to the next car park. So it doesn't matter whether smart technology is implemented or not. We need to use price as a driver to assist our businesses within the city so that they can have customers come into the city and spend money in their stores. Because if we've got shufflers taking up car parks, then those car parks are not available for shoppers and people to spend money in the shops. And as I said, if we don't have people excuse me, coming into our shops and spending money, then there will be no shops in the city centre.
Thank you. Speaker for the amendment? So that ends the debate on the amendment.
Can I wrap up, Madam Chair, please?
Sorry?
Can I wrap up, please?
Yes, you can. Thank you.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't see anywhere in the report that it says paying for the smart parking, we have to get a revenue source to pay for the smart parking. So, you know, if we use that logic, there'd be lots of things that we wouldn't do at council. So I can't see that that's a valid argument. So one of the reasons why we're wanting to do this is to change behaviour. That's fair enough. But it's not only that, it's having a cashless system, it's knowing, it's convenience, it's customer experience. We know where the car parks are. So, you know, going, I think, you know, telling the community that we're going from, if it's 30 minutes, we're going to be raising an extra $850,000 a year, to an hour, we're going to be just down to $780,000 a year. I don't know that I sit very comfortably with that. So, you know, behaviour is one thing, making it cashless is another, and I think disruption to an already existing confusion over car parking. I think, as you say, Rodney, their 1 hour works well. We can see, we drive down Ruthven Street, there's parks there all the time. So for that reason, I would like to have the least disruption to the community, who has already been confused many times over in the last few years.
Thank you, Councillor Howard-Sullivan. I'll now take a vote on the amendment. Those in favour? Those against? The amendment's lost. We go back to the original motion. Thank you. Well, you have moved it, Councillor.
Madam Chair, could I suggest an amendment to the original motion?
Councillor McDonald?
To add number 2 to the motion, so that number 1 stays it is, or back to where it was, 30 minutes. And number 2 simply says, words to the effect of, I'm happy for councillors to have some input in this, that council invest the revenue received from the Toowoomba CBD on-street car parking into initiatives to support the attractiveness of the Toowoomba CBD. And I'm happy to talk to that, just to give some context as to why that would be.
Have you got an issue with that? So do we have a seconder to that amendment? Councillor Shine?
Happy to talk to it.
Right. Okay,
So I'm
there are...
happy to talk to that.
Councillors, we've got a mover and a seconder. Councillor McDonald, you
Thanks,
speak to the
Madam Chair.
amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think taking on board all of what's been said, everybody loves free parking. I love free parking. We all do. The fact remains that free parking isn't actually free. It actually means that other things that we'd like done can't get done. And we've heard ad nauseum from shoppers, from shop owners, around various initiatives that could be done in the CBD, and unfortunately it's not done because of one reason, and there are many reasons, but one of those reasons may well be because it's free parking. So perhaps there's an opportunity when we go out to inform the community to gain feedback from the community as to what they would see would be priorities for the CBD. The Toowoomba Chamber of Commerce have been very active with their CBD advisory group. I know that our own economic development team have been very active trying to activate the CBD. The work that's being done in Russell Street is tremendous. But the opportunities for our CBD to be what we aspire it to be is all dependent on private investment and council investment. And unfortunately, because of the demands on local government that get greater and greater each and every year, prioritisation of things means that the niceties are often missed. And I can just list a few little things that have come across our desks, not just mine, our desks over a number of years. Footpaths, for example, making sure that they're accessible around the CBD for those that have walking difficulties, and not just on wheelie walkers and others, but actually just walking difficulties is a challenge from time to time. Street lighting to make our car parks a safe place to be, in general street lighting. Councillor Megan O'Hara-Sullivan's fairy lights up the street, all add to amenity. We also have outside dining options for restaurants that, given a more attractive perhaps footpath or areas of opportunity for improvement, could be enhanced. Plantings around the CBD are always challenged through our parks team because of budget considerations. How great would it be to have a visitor inspiration centre, or as they're called, a visitor information centre in our CBD, manned possibly by volunteers, or dare I say it, down the track, some of our parking enforcement people who are often the brunt of some terrible backlash from community, yet they could be proactively engaged by giving people places where to go. We're around the corner from Christmas and Christmas decorations in the CBD. Electric charging for vehicles, a charging station in the CBD. These are just some examples that have come across councillors' desks and via emails and others all the way through, not just this term but other terms. E-scooters, bike shares, caravan parking in the CBD often crops up when we talk to tourism operators. And I think the number one thing that we could bring forward as an option for council to consider is a dedicated CBD experience and activation officer that could work with the community, and that's been called for a number of years. So I toss those ideas up, and they're not my ideas, they're ideas that have come from the community, Madam Chair, as ways for us to engage in a meaningful way, not just to inform the community that we are now going to start charging for parking, because free parking is not necessarily free, but we're actually going to reinvest that money into the CBD to make it a more attractive place, and therefore it's a win-win for all of the community.
So I don't know how much car parking fines you're expecting to get, Councillor McDonald, with
Madam
that list.
Chair,
but-
Madam Chair, can you let me finish? I'm not actually talking about fines. I'm talking about revenue streams, post the funds that have been raised to pay for the smart parking. If we're talking close to $1 million a year, added and added and added, we need to show that the money that's raised in that area is spent in that area to improve the attractiveness of it.
Yeah,
and that's why that
look, I've let it go on. I think, it's a worthy thing, but and our CBD, we can't make it more beautiful enough. So I think against? Question?
Yeah, question, Madam Chair. It's probably through you to Councillor Jeff. Councillor Jeff, how do you work through the process of a normal budgetary process when revenues goes back into consolidated revenue? As far as an amendment goes, I would be much more comfortable with that council consider prioritisation of initiatives as part of the budgetary considerations.
And that's
that is inconsistent with any normal process. I don't disagree that we should be looking at incentives or rather ways to improve and spend monies in those areas, but because it's revenue generated either from fines or parking fees, then that becomes part of consolidated revenue.
It's a very good point you make, and I think it does need to be. Sounds
I'd like
wonderful to talk about all those things, but
I'd like to support the amendment, but I'd like it to be consistent with normal budgetary practice.
That's what I said at the start. I'm happy for councillors to work this through, but with that change in there, when you put that up there, I'm happy.
I might just ask Mike if he wanted to make acting CEO, if he wanted to make a comment on that.
With respect to the amendment.
Yes, and how it fits with budgetary practices. Because it might step over a line.
Look, it is challenge. It does put a bit of a challenge to. Obviously, it's council's choice at the end of the day. If council wants to hypothecate some level of revenue towards an area of where it wants to spend those funds. That said, at the moment, all the funding from car parking revenue goes into just our general budget, into just general fees and charges. So the commitment here is sort of committing a budgetary process going forward, but it's the choice of this room to make that choice.
Madam Chair, that's why I raised that we consider prioritisation of initiatives. It doesn't mean to say that trumps everything, that we consider as part of, and it doesn't have those words in there yet, as part of the budget considerations or as part of the budgetary process.
It's a good point you make, and I mean, what are we robbing? We need to be a little bit careful. Councillor McDonald, do you accept that change?
Madam Chair, I accept it. I just think from us to go out to the community, it's important for us to identify that this isn't a revenue-raising exercise. No. This is about improving the experience. Now, part of that would be reinvestment into the CBD, and we do it in a number of ways already. I've mentioned a few of those. But for a tangible, meaningful engagement over the next 4 months, to have the community have a say, what would they like to see? You will get a far greater understanding of why we are doing this.
But I think the point is that the money already provides amenity in other ways for our community. So I think this is to consider is possibly a better wording, I think. We can all sit there, everyone's got different ideas about how to beautify the CBD. In the end, it'll be what council goes through anyway. So I think the words are more pertinent. Do you accept those words? Is happy with that? Councillor Rebecca, did you have a question? All right. So we've got a for and against the amendment. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Chair. There's so much here. I will never be able to not hear shufflers be shuffling. I think that's great. Supportive of the idea here that the money raised from this doesn't go into consolidated revenue and that it is channelled into initiatives in the CBD. I'm supportive of that. Be that as it may though, the real issue for me is that the meat of what we're considering today is extending paid parking to places where it's not paid at the moment. And I think we have to be honest with ourselves and say, are we doing the thing that we're supposed to be doing according to the strategy? Maximising customer experience. And unless people's bars are different to mine, we are not maximising customer experience currently. People have huge problems with paid parking. They are required to use cash. They run into all sorts of problems. And I think that I am wholly supportive of the concept of paid parking. And I am wholly supportive of the smart parking initiative. But we have to do paid parking properly before we extend it. And we're not doing it properly at the moment. So the time, in my opinion, to consider extending what we're already doing is once the smart parking program is up and running. Because until then, we don't have our house in order and we definitely shouldn't be extending. Once the smart parking initiative is up, then that's the time for us to say, okay, we put a premium on these parks and we're going to extend the pricing model. But not now, because our house isn't in order. And we have to be honest with ourselves about that.
Madam Chair, we're really just voting on the amendment
We're
at the
just
moment.
debating the amendment is what we're debating, the amendment. We're
If the
debating
amendment
right
goes
now
through,
the
then it'll be
amendment
full.
that Councillor McDonald moved and Councillor Shine seconded.
It's
That we
part two.
add a clause 2. We're just debating what has been added there. So is there anyone to speak
So,
against?
Madam Chair, just to identify, so once it gets lost, then we go back to the original. If it gets, then we vote on both.
As we did with the last one. Yeah, thank you. Anyone against the amendment? Councillor James.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whilst I think the idea of what we're putting forward here has a lot of merit and would add a lot to the CBD, I'm going to pick up on just a few points that Councillor Vonhoff raised before and why I struggle to think that we can add this. Well, one, by putting the word consider means nothing. That's what we do now, to be honest. That really, for me, consider takes away every bit of intent of what the motion that was put forward, but that's not why I'm against it. That's a side point. My point is, if we were to do that, the nub of the problem we're trying to fix here is around parking and that improved customer experience, etc. So by taking revenue that we earn from this initial stage, or what do we say, of parking, and putting it into something else within the CBD, as I said, whilst I think quite a worthwhile project, how does that improve parking? Like how does taking some revenue that we take from that to ask the community what they would like for initiatives throughout the CBD, I think it could be argued that what initiatives should be put in through the CBD is our core business. We should be looking at that on its merits based on priority of other projects right across the region. So I just don't, as I said, I'm supportive of wanting to improve the CBD, absolutely, very much so. But for me, I just struggle to understand, as I said, it comes back to that to me. By doing that, how does that improve the parking situation? And for me, it doesn't. So they are my reasons why I reluctantly speak and vote against the amendment. Because as I said, I think there's merit in the suggestion.
Thank you, Councillor Shea, but it's the car park strategy implementation project, not just about car parking, charging or not. So there's a strategy there, and this is just moving forward, implementing that strategy, and it's a way to bring it in a measured fashion. Anyone for the amendment? Councillor Shine?
Yeah, no, thanks, Chair. Just on that point, I presume the purpose of the strategy is in part, if not in whole, to encourage the flexibility of parking in the centre of town, which in turn will foster people shopping in town because there'll be more turnover, etc. I presume that's the idea of it. In relation to the amendment, I was happy to, I am still happy to second the amendment. I must say I preferred in its original form, taking on board what Councillor O'Shea has just said about our obligation really to consider all matters when framing the budget. But nevertheless, if Councillor McDonald, as Chair of Finance and Business, is happy with it, and hopefully he will remain Chair of that portfolio, I know it will be considered in forthcoming budgets. So that gives me some assurance. The reason I'm sure every councillor here, the reason I support anything that is likely to encourage the greater activity and use of the CBD, be it shop top living or an idea that I know the Mayor and I think other councillors who were fortunate enough to visit Mackay week before last saw in the street these historical plaques, and we all thought, I think, and Councillor Carroll as well, we all thought it was something that would be good to implement that in Toowoomba. This is the sort of funding that Councillor McDonald has suggested, I think, could go into that sort of a project, and I think it has the backing of the Chamber of Commerce as well. So if you had I think if you had a specific fund there, it would facilitate the implementation of measures of that nature. But for the reasons I said at the beginning, I'm happy to support the motion as proposed, as now proposed by Councillor McDonald.
Thank you, Councillor Shine. Anyone else? Anyone against the amendment? I'll put the amendment. It's moved by Councillor McDonald, seconded by Councillor Shine. Those in favour? Those against? The amendment's carried. Sorry? We haven't got anyone sitting out. Why do we need a division? Of course. Sorry. Those in favour?
You up, James, or down?
No, he's down. And those against? So now we go back to the amendment becomes the motion. We have a mover and a seconder for the motion. I'll put the motion. Those in favour? And I take it, Councillor Rebecca, you've spoken against it before.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I'm glad I got my timing wrong.
No, I would have asked because everyone else has had a say, but you're happy to take that as your comment? Thank you. Those in favour and those against? We're right. Thank you very much, councillors. Can I ask for a motion to go into a closed session, please? Okay, morning tea. Morning tea. I think I'm getting a direction here. You don't want to go on? No? We'll take a short 20 minutes?
No, 10.
10 minutes. Okay, thank you. confidential. Can I, will be closed to the public. Can I have someone to move that we go into closed session? Councillor Megan and Councillor Melissa. Those in favour? Thank you. Right, Brendan? And the recommendation, I just lost it here, sorry. The recommendation's up there, that the Chief Executive Officer be authorised to negotiate the acquisition of the property as detailed in the confidential report titled Property Purchase Opportunity, Toowoomba City Aerodrome. 2, that in the event of the negotiations are successful, that this purchase be funded under the Development Reserve, and consideration be given in future budgets to staging budget allocation for lease development. So it's just nothing going forward at this stage. Can I mover? Councillor Paul Antonio, seconder, Councillor Melissa Taylor. Those in favour? It's carried, thank you. And thank you very much, councillors. It's been an interesting morning and we've good debate. So that ends the Infrastructure Committee for November. Can you believe it? And I think we can now go back to planning. Thank you, Stuart.
Move that we resume the meeting. Councillor McDonald, Councillor Shine, all those in favour? And now I need someone to move that we close the meeting. That's right. Councillor Von Hoff and Councillor Carol Taylor, all those in favour? Thank you. Item number 5 is the Development Services Planning and Environment Court Appeals and Compensation Claims. Can I have someone move that we note the acceptance of that report? Councillor Von Hoff, Councillor Carl, all those in favour? It's carried. And item number 6 is the Regional Enforcement Actions for October 2021. Can I have someone note that report? Councillor McMahon and the Mayor, all those in favour? It's carried. And that's the conclusion of the meeting, 11:31. Thanks, councillors, for that.